Hello everyone. Today we are going to consider the effect of environmental pollution on biodiversity. Our intended learning outcomes are to review environmental pollution in the context of biodiversity crisis, to understand some historic and current common pollutants, and finally to look at species which are particularly threatened by environmental pollution. I want to break this video into some shorter parts, into 2 or 3 parts, so this is the first part of it. Chemical pollution and biodiversity loss. Today there's already an estimated 1 million species already facing extinction. I'm sure you're aware already from having done this course. And urgent action is needed to prevent that, if we want to stop that from happening. And there are 5 identified major causes of biodiversity loss, some of which will have already been covered in this module in other lectures. So changes in land and sea use, direct exploitation of organisms, climate change, invasion of alien species, and finally pollution, which is what we're going to be considering today. These 5 drivers, they were identified in 2022 in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And pollution is sometimes doesn't get as much attention as some of the other big drivers like land use change and climate change. Unlike the immediate and visible threats such as deforestation or habitat destruction, the effects of chemical pollution, they're more subtle and cumulative. So you might have, for example, some air pollution and you can't immediately see it, and it isn't a discrete event like when you chop down a forest. It's something which is lingering, like when it's staying for a period of time, and it can have extended effects if you have a persistent chemical which is there for a long time, which is one of the things which we're going to be looking into today. It's also sometimes quite hard to get the evidence of this, you know, of when there's, you know, how you know that there's the chemical is to actually prove cause and effect, to show that that is what is causing the biodiversity loss. So that's perhaps something else to think about, but it doesn't mean that the effect necessarily isn't real, but it's just we need to show that these what the evidence is. So it's not enough just to have a correlation, like say there's more of a substance in the environment and then there's biodiversity loss. We want to actually show, you know, that there's a causal link, and so that might be some further study sometimes. Some of the causes of chemical pollution is farming operations feeding the world. And this uses a lot of resources, and there's pollutants coming as a result from this, as the nutrient fertilizers. They can cause eutrophication when they run off into the water, and then there's the toxic chemicals, which pesticides, which are designed to kill the pests, weeds and diseases which threaten crop production, but then they also have off-target effects when they go into the wider environment. Then there's industrial manufacturing of products, and the pollution which is involved in that. And there's this infographic. It particularly mentions microplastics, and I think that's an increasing source of pollution. But there's a whole range of different things, and there's bisphenols, PFAs, flame retardants, various things being mentioned here. Also, in processing waste and recycling and disposal, then that can also cause pollution if it's not disposed of in the right way. So these are some of the sources of chemical pollution. I'd also like to introduce this topic, to draw your attention immediately to this concept of the dose making the poison. So this very important aspect of it, because whether something is poisonous or not will depend on how much of it there is. And so you even have some substances which are beneficial in small quantities, but then they become harmful if you have too much of them. I mean, even simple things like salt, like table salt. If you have the right amount of it, it's in your food. Even it's something which is good. But if you consume excessive amounts of this, then it could become poisonous. And so this comes from an ancient, well, almost ancient statement attributed to someone called Pericles, and the original quote is, "All substances are poisons. There is none that is not a poison. The right dose differentiates a poison and a remedy." So this really matters, how much of a substance there is, and there could be something which is potentially poisonous or toxic, but if it's at a low level, then it's not actually going to be harmful. It depends on how much of it is present in the environment and how much an organism is exposed to it. So excuse the small font here, but I'm just trying to show visually that some of the factors which are influencing the severity of pollution. So we have the chemical itself. So the identity of the chemical, that matters, because some substances, obviously, they're more poisonous than others. So that's the first thing. What is the actual chemical itself? Then we have the concentration. So this links back to what I was saying in the previous slide. How the dose makes the poison. So how much of it is present? Have you got enough of it there to actually make a toxic load? And the amount of it is linked to the duration of exposure. So if an organism is exposed to something over an extended period of time, then it will get more of a dose of it. It will be exposed for the concentration for, if you have a high concentration of something that then breaks down and rapidly, and then you have low concentrations, then that's going to be less harmful than a persistent substance which is lingering in the environment and is always there at quite high amounts, because then you have more exposure to this. And finally, then there's the actual sensitivity of the organism, the species that's being considered. How sensitive is it to that particular chemical? So from what we've already discussed, it's clear that how long something lingers in the environment does make a difference. And so we have some substances which are called persistent organic pollutants, and there's sometimes in popular media that refer to as forever chemicals, and these are problematic because they break down very slowly. So that increases the duration of exposure that an organism would have to it. They accumulate in organisms. They increase in concentration as they move up the food chain, and they can also spread globally because they're moving around in the world. So sometimes these substances they can affect entire food webs, and they can and when they're staying for a long time, then that increases the risk that they might move to other parts of the world, like for example the Arctic, where it's colder, and so that will mean that it'll take even longer to break down, and so it could cause even more issues for the environment there. We have some examples like PCBs. We also have a very persistent pesticide called DDT, which has now been banned, but it's before people were aware of these effects. Then this was a very widely used pesticide, DDT. We've got that as an example. I'll show that in some later slides as well. Some concepts in ecotoxicology. So we've got bioaccumulation. That's when the concentration of a chemical in an organism increases over time. So it's one of these persistent chemicals which isn't breaking down, and the amount of it is actually is increasing in the body of the organism over time. Then we have biotransformation. So this is when an organism has the ability to break something down, and so it's got metabolic processes that can alter the structure and toxicity of the compound. So it will have enzymes. It will have enzymes which can break down the chemical into smaller, less harmful substances with the ability to process it there. And biodegradation, that's the name for the breakdown of a xenobiotic. Xenobiotic, that refers to chemicals which are not are unnatural and that are produced and toxic, that are being produced by humans. We also can consider how different groups of organisms, so here we've got some animal groups, are sensitive to pollutants. And you'll be familiar probably with this graph you've probably seen it in slides from some of the other lectures, and it shows these different drivers of biodiversity loss, and you can see there that we've got this light green for shading for the pollution, and birds and reptiles and amphibians, they seem to have more of a risk. So there's more of the green shading there with those two groups, and reasons for this is that that amphibians and reptiles, they might have thinner skin, and so it's easier for the chemicals to pass across it. And for birds, because they're flying in the air, then they have a greater exposure to air pollution. So this is another point to note, that some species are more susceptible than others, and also it's quite interesting to compare the importance of these different drivers of biodiversity loss. You can see there that for some groups, these habitat degradation and exploitation, those are major drivers, and really do require some attention, but those are outside of the scope of this particular lecture. So what I would like to do now is give you a quick overview of some of the pollution issues which there have been over time. So I will actually do a separate video for this. I'll start another video for this because I think it might be good to take a break now, and then you have be fresh and have full attention for the next part, because the slides that we've had so far, it's been pretty much introduction now. So thanks for listening. Please listen to the next instalment, which is going to be a bit of a tour of some of the examples of pollution. This comes from Earth Day, anniversary of the Earth Day, 50 years of Earth Day. They did a really nice infographic of this. I'm going to talk through some of that in the next lecture, so please come back so that you can see that. Thanks, guys.
We get this biomagnification up the food chain. So because it's a fat-soluble persistent chemical, we get it in relatively low doses at the lower trophic level. So let's pretend this was the crayfish, the zooplankton that we saw earlier. This then gets fed on by a crayfish, which gets fed on by another organism, and you can see how this bioaccumulates to that highest trophic level. So DDT spreads globally in the atmosphere to water and soil, and because of that high lipophility, it's going to accumulate in those adipose tissues, and at that highest trophic level, they're being exposed to a high level of DDT pollution. So the common transport systems that you're used to seeing, so the evotranspiration system, we can see that this happens the same with these these organochloride chemicals as well. So they're readily deposited. In fact, if you look at concentrations of compounds like PCBs, for example, you can see you get really high concentrations in those Arctic regions and the Antarctic regions because of this cycle that we see here. So they get evaporated, they head up, and then there was precipitation, so they end up getting back into the ecosystem, but they very rapidly get transported across the globe. That is air pollution. Air pollution is the contamination of indoor or outdoor environments by any chemical, physical, or biological agent that can modify the characteristics of the atmosphere. So indoor air pollution is often linked to household combustion devices, so wood stoves, etc. And then we've also got outdoor, which is motor vehicles, industrial facilities, and then some natural things like forest fires, and they're quite common sources of air pollution. Now, pollutants of major public health concern include particulate matters, and these come in multiple different size fractions and are made up of multiple different compounds. Usually they're linked to fossil fuel burning and outputs from cars. They come in 10 micrometers, 2.5 micrometers, and less than 1 micrometer. And they're classified into these size categories because the smaller you go, the more chance it has to pass through the membranes in the lung and sit deeper, so it can cause multiple issues. Another one that you're probably familiar with is carbon monoxide. We've then got ozone, and particularly ground level ozone, nitrogen dioxide, and sulfur dioxide. There's many more, these are just some of the common ones. Indoor and outdoor air pollution have been known to cause respiratory and other diseases, and they're an important source of morbidity and mortality. So they are actually linked to about 11.65% of human deaths annually. So not only is it respiratory, it's also been linked to diabetes, it's been linked to strokes, dementia, so lots of issues from air pollution. The World Health Organization data shows that almost all of the global population, so 99%, breathe air that exceeds the WHO guideline limits and contains high level of pollution. It's often termed the silent killer because you can't see air pollution. Often low and middle income countries suffer from the highest exposure levels. Now, it's worth also noting that air quality is linked closely to the Earth's climate and ecosystems globally. So many drivers of pollution, such as fossil fuels, are also sources of greenhouse gas emissions. And policies to reduce air pollution offer that good strategy for both climate and health and lower that burden of disease. Now, animals and wildlife in general are vulnerable to harm from air pollution. Pollution concerns include acid rain, heavy metals, and persistent organic pollutants and other toxic substances. So there's been a few big die-offs as a result of air pollution, birds being one of these. So with wildfires particularly, and I've linked the paper below, there's been noted to be large die-off of birds. So not only do wildfires result in the loss of habitats, they also result in the emission of particulate matter and volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, which pose serious threats to wildlife and human populations, particularly for those avian species. So as we mentioned earlier on, birds are more sensitive to air pollution than a lot of other species. So their respiratory system is particularly sensitive to air pollution. So they saw in America during some of the wildfires in 2010 that you had mass die-offs of birds as a result of the air pollution that was emitted. It's worth going and having a read of this paper. It's an interesting paper to have a look at, and it talks about modelling some of this, so investigating the environmental drivers of die-offs by combining those Earth observations and citizen science observations. So well worth a read. So this graph map shows the deaths from air pollution, or the share of deaths that are attributed to air pollution, both indoor and outdoor, specifically for humans. So we can see that in particular countries, the darker blue we get, the more deaths are linked to air pollution. So like we mentioned in the last slide, it tends to be low or middling income areas that are most affected by these. Particularly due to the reliance from wood for fuel, so indoor air pollution is a factor on this as well. Or you could pop along to this Our World in Data, which is interesting to go and have a look at on air pollution. Like I say, termed the silent killer because you don't see air pollution, but we are all breathing it in, probably right now as we speak. So linked to air pollution, we have ocean acidification. So the ocean absorbs large amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, nearly 30%. And as a result of this, because the CO2 is slightly acidic, as the CO2 increases, the pH level of the ocean decreases. In many areas of the ocean, the seawater is filled with calcium carbonate minerals, which are essential for marine organisms. When ocean acidification occurs, corals and bivalves are negatively affected. So as the pH rises in the ocean, the levels of carbonate decrease. Things like diatoms and shrimps, like krill, are at the base of the ocean food chain, and they survive in calcium carbonate shells. And they provide food for other organisms, including small fish and marine mammals. Ocean acidification makes it harder for those organisms to form protective shells. So bivalves such as mussels, oysters, clams and scallops require this calcium carbonate, and the lower level of carbonate reduces that ability of the bivalves to produce and maintain their shells. It may also cause existing shells to weaken and dissolve, which makes them more vulnerable and increases their chance of predation. Once we see those lower level on the food chain, those bivalves and those krill and those diatoms being reduced, it infects the entire food chain. Additionally, corals are affected as they build the reef using calcium carbonate to form these complex reefs, which provides habitat for many marine organisms. If we combine the ocean acidification along with higher water temperatures, we can see that many coral reefs around the world are dying off. So ocean acidification may limit coral growth as existing coral skeletons are corroded, and it also slows that growth of new skeletons, which weakens the corals so they're more vulnerable to erosion. Not only will we see these lower life forms affected, but also the fish and the marine mammals will suffer. Fish and other forms of sea life will be contaminated by ocean acidification, so they're unable to be consumed by other animals and humans as well. The continuing rise of acidic levels in the ocean may also cause reproductive disorders in fish, and whales and dolphins are likely directly impacted from ocean acidification, as they depend on these krill and other small organisms. So just looking at shells and ocean acidification, what we have here on the slide is a pteropod, or a sea butterfly. It's a tiny sea creature which is about the size of a small pea. Pteropods are eaten by multiple different organisms, ranging in size from tiny krill all the way through to whales, they're also a food source for North Pacific juvenile salmon. The photo shows a pteropod cell which has been dissolved over 45 days, and they place this in seawater with pH and carbonate levels predicted for the year 2100. So you can see by that 45-day point the massive impact that it's had to this organism's shell. It's quite shocking, really.